Hi, my name is Emily. I'm 26, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one my family blames when life doesn't go their way. But the night it all broke open was at my sister's biggest dance competition. The lights dimmed, the scores were read, and Jessica placed fourth. So close, yet not enough. The applause faded into uneasy silence. Jessica stood frozen in her bow, tears threatening to spill under the stage lights. And then my mother's voice cut through the hall. Sharp, merciless, impossible to take back. This is your fault, Emily. You're nothing but a bad luck charm. Every head turned toward me. Every whisper landed like a stone. And in that moment, something inside me finally cracked. I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in a house that looked picture perfect from the street. 2 parents, 2 daughters, a neat lawn, a flag on the porch. But inside there was a rule no one ever said out loud. Jessica could do no wrong. And I could do no right. Jessica was born graceful, her limbs built for dance, her smile made for spotlights. By the time she was 4, our living room walls were lined with her ribbons and trophies. My mother would beam, my father would brag, and I would clap the loudest from the sidelines. I wasn't jealous. I had my own talents. I buried myself in books, earned straight A's, eventually made valedictorian. But where Jessica's medals were framed, my report cards were shoved into a drawer. Of course Emily did well, Mom would say. As expected. That word, expected, erased every ounce of pride I'd felt. And when things went wrong, it was easier for them to pin it on me. I still remember being 8 years old, when Jessica sprained her ankle before a recital. I had been in my room, quietly reading, but my mother told the dance teacher, Emily was running around again. She brings bad luck. From then on, the pattern stuck. If the car broke down, it was because I sat in the front seat. If it rained on vacation, it was because I packed the wrong color suitcase. Every mishap, every stumble, my mother's eyes found me, like I had cursed the family simply by breathing. My father never challenged her. He'd sigh, rub his temples, maybe give me a sympathetic pat on the shoulder. But silence is agreement, and his silence told me maybe they were right. Maybe I really was bad luck. Still, I kept trying. I thought if I studied harder, smiled wider, made myself useful, they would see me as more than a curse. But the harder I tried, the more invisible I became. Those words, bad luck charm, weren't just something my mother said in anger. They seeped into my bones, haunted me in classrooms, echoed when I lay awake at night. And it didn't stop when I became an adult. If a bill arrived late, it was because I'd jinxed the mail. If Jessica missed a callback, it was because I had spoken to her that morning. Every failure needed a scapegoat. And in our family, I was it. By the time I turned 20, I wasn't just carrying my own mistakes. I was carrying the weight of every bad thing that happened under our roof. I should have known then that no matter what I achieved, I would never be free until I walked away. College was my escape hatch. The University of Michigan gave me 4 years of distance, and for the first time, I felt what it was like to breathe without someone blaming me for the weather or the bills or my sister's stumbles. I threw myself into accounting. Not glamorous, but stable. Numbers never accused me of cursing them. Equations never rolled their eyes. I worked late, tutored classmates, delivered pizzas on weekends. I drank too much coffee and slept too little. But when I walked across that graduation stage, I believed I had finally broken the spell. Then reality hit. The economy was tight, entry-level jobs scarce, and student loans waited like wolves at the door. With no other choice, I moved back home. I told myself it was temporary. Just a year, maybe 2. Just until I could afford my own apartment. But returning meant slipping right back into the role I thought I'd outgrown. Jessica was 29 then, still chasing the dance career. My parents called her destiny. She lived rent-free, spent entire days rehearsing routines that sometimes ended in tears, but never in paychecks. And my parents carried her like glass, fragile, precious, untouchable. I, on the other hand, carried the bills, water, electricity, internet, groceries. When envelopes stacked on the counter, my mother slid them toward me. Emily, can you cover this? She didn't ask Jessica. Never Jessica. I wanted to scream. I'm 26, not the head of household, but I swallowed it, just like I always had. Because saying no felt selfish, and selfish was just another word. They would have tacked onto bad luck. The house felt smaller with me back in it. Every squeak of the floorboards seemed to irritate my mother. Every time Jessica's audition Wi-Fi cut out, she looked at me like I had willed it. My father kept his head down, quiet at the dinner table, pretending balance still existed here. I worked full-time at an accounting firm, paid more than my share, and saved what little I could. Some nights, I'd sit in my car outside the house, hands gripping the steering wheel, delaying going inside. I told myself the peace of my own space was coming soon. Still, the words chased me. Bad luck charm. They hovered when my boss frowned, when coworkers laughed without me, when traffic lights turned red at the wrong time. Superstition had been poured into me, until it felt like part of my bloodstream. But I kept moving forward, silent, determined. Every paycheck I tucked away, every boundary I whispered instead of shouted, was one more step toward freedom. I didn't know it then, but the storm that would finally force me to break away completely was already building, and I was about to walk straight into it. The Midwest Regional Championship was supposed to be Jessica's big moment. She was 29, older than most of the dancers, and everyone whispered, this might be her last shot. My parents poured thousands into it. Costumes, private coaching, hotel rooms, bills stacked on the kitchen counter, but no one spoke of it. Jessica's career was the family altar, and everything else could burn. I hadn't wanted to go. I had a project deadline, and I knew what my presence really meant. A scapegoat, ready and waiting. But my mother insisted. We need the whole family together for luck. The convention center in Chicago buzzed, with hairspray and nerves. Dancers stretched in corners. Mothers barked at makeup artists. Judges whispered with clipboards. Jessica warmed up in silence, her face calm but her hands shaking. Here, she said suddenly, handing me a silver bracelet. It's my lucky charm. Hold it for me. The request startled me. Jessica never trusted me with anything important. I closed my hand around it, a small, fragile peace offering. Minutes later, she stepped on stage. The lights hit her, and for a while she soared. Every leap, every turn carved from fire. But then a slip, barely noticeable to strangers. But I knew her choreography by heart. Her rhythm faltered. One turn landed heavy. Her face tightened, and she finished to polite applause. Not thunder. I clutched that bracelet, praying somehow she'd still place high. But when the announcer read the results, her name landed in 4th place. Respectable, but not enough for contracts or headlines. Jessica froze mid-bow, her tears catching in the spotlight. The applause sounded hollow, like pity more than praise. And then it happened. My mother turned, her face red with fury, her voice loud enough to pierce the hush. She failed because of you, Emily. You're nothing but a bad luck charm. The words hit harder than the music ever could. Gasps rippled, heads swiveled, whispers spread like wildfire. Jessica didn't defend me. She didn't say a word. She just looked at me through her tears and whispered, "Why did you have to come?" It was the knife after the bullet, the confirmation that even she believed what Mom had poisoned us all with. I felt the blood drain from my face. I wanted to disappear, to sink through the carpeted floor, to wake up somewhere no one knew my name. My father stood with his hands in his pockets, silent as always. Not a shield, not a sword, just an absence. I turned and walked. Through the lobby, past the murmuring parents, out into the cold night air. The city lights blurred with tears, my heart pounding in my ears. In that moment, it didn't matter that Jessica stumbled on her own. It didn't matter that the scores were fair. In my family's story, I was the villain, the curse, the reason dreams died. And standing there in Chicago, I realized something sharp and undeniable. If I didn't walk away, they would use me as their scapegoat forever. 3 weeks after Chicago, our house felt colder than winter. Mom drifted past me, refusing to meet my eyes. Jessica cried behind her door, then glared when I appeared. Dad stayed silent, a ghost who never defended me. At dinner, the quiet pressed heavier than meatloaf. Mom straightened, eyes bright with a hard resolve. "There's another chance," she said. "A workshop in Los Angeles. Big choreographers, industry scouts. Jessica can't miss this." I clenched my jaw and asked the question I dreaded. "How much will it cost?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. $5,000 tuition, Mom replied like she'd rehearsed it. "Plus flights, hotel, costumes, new shoes. It's an investment." I set my fork down, done pretending not to understand. "And where does that money come from this time?" "Cards are maxed. The second mortgage is bleeding us." "We'll find a way," Mom snapped, jaw tightening to stone. "Jessica's future is worth any sacrifice, whatever it takes." "Maybe Jessica could teach while she keeps training," I offered. "Plenty of dancers work part-time. She could help with costs." Jessica flushed, shaking her head like I'd insulted her. "I can't work. I need 6 hours training daily. This is my chance, Emily. I can't lose focus." I nodded slowly, then said what no one would say. "Maybe it's time to be realistic about our finances. Please be honest about the numbers, not superstition." Mom's fork clattered. The air froze around our table. "Just because you gave up on dreams doesn't mean she should." The words hit harder than a slap. I didn't give up. I built a career in life. School, night shifts, paying bills you ignored. That's surviving. She wasn't listening. Her eyes burned with contempt. You've always been jealous, dragging shadows into rooms. Always the curse, always bad energy. You're bad luck. Jessica stared down, tears falling quietly while Dad stayed mute. No one spoke for me, not once. Something inside me hardened, crystallizing into cold. Then maybe you'll all be better off without me. I pushed my chair back, its scrape splitting the silence. Every step away felt heavier than stone. That night I opened my suitcase and began to pack. Not for a trip, not a weekend away, for freedom. I wasn't coming back. The night I left, the silence didn't crush me, it opened. Allison's couch became a harbor where blame couldn't dock. Her tiny apartment held space my childhood never allowed. I slept, ate, and didn't apologize for breathing. 3 weeks later, I signed a lease with shaking hands. Beige walls, thrifted couch, plants lining a sunlit window. I promised, no one here would call me cursed. Work changed when the house stopped draining my oxygen. I focused, delivered, and earned trust without begging. My boss handed me bigger clients and room to grow. Life widened beyond obligation, beyond managing everyone's weather. I joined a book club, yoga, and Sunday neighborhood walks. Then the calls started, tugging at old, familiar strings. Dad asked nicely. Mom accused like nothing had changed. This wouldn't happen if you'd stayed, she said coldly. I didn't argue. I adjusted how help would happen. I paid Jessica's providers directly. Invoices verified and scheduled. No transfers, no cash, no vanishing into family fog. For the first time, boundaries held and power stayed. Therapy helped me name the pattern I survived. Scapegoating wasn't fate. It was avoidance dressed as belief. Months later, Jessica called with honesty shaking her voice. I'm sorry I let Mom use you as cover. It was easier than admitting I was afraid. I cried quietly, because validation arrived 20 years late. Dad followed with truth he'd avoided his entire life. Keeping peace wasn't love. I should have protected you. He meant it. And I let the apology land. Mom stayed hardest. Superstition welded into her bones. At my wedding, she watched quietly from the second row. A stiff smile, no curses, and that was enough. I learned leaving wasn't betrayal. It was survival's doorway. It's how I reclaimed worth they never planned to see. I am not bad luck, never was, never will be. I am Emily. Accountant, friend, partner, flawed human, whole. If you've walked away to save yourself, speak below. Your story could steady someone standing at the door. If this resonated, subscribe for more stories and strength. You are not cursed, and you are not alone. My sister raised her glass at my niece's party, smiling. Still playing house with your cats, Emma? She chimed. Laughter skimmed the room like knives wrapped in napkins. I counted sprinkles on the cake, swallowing another comeback. Then the door opened. Afternoon light spilled across carpet. James stepped in, careful, carrying Sophie warm from nap. He kissed her forehead, scanned the stunned faces once. Go to Mama, he said, voice gentle as Sunday. Mommy! Sophie squealed, arms reaching toward me without hesitation. Silence hit, heavy as church air before confession. I lifted her, her fingers finding my necklace automatically. I'm Emma Chen, 28, project manager, former cat lady punchline. I built a quiet life that everyone called practice. Today, practice answered back and called me by name. If family ever laughed at your choices, breathe with me. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And please hit like and subscribe before we continue. This is a story about dignity, love, and becoming. About a little girl who said mommy and meant me. And the day a room full of relatives finally listened. Before that party, the jokes had a history. They started small, then learned to draw blood cleanly. Cat lady in training, Karen sang across dessert plates. Relatives smiled like hostages. I stacked plates and breathed. Sunday dinners turned into obstacle courses disguised as pot roast. Must be nice, all that free time, she purred. Mom changed topics. Dad oversalted potatoes like a metronome. I rinsed dishes until steam could hide my feelings. Online, the chorus grew louder, dressed as wholesome posts. Grateful for my real family, she wrote, tagging me. Cousins lobbed laughing emojis that never sounded like laughter. Grandma asked if I'd married my career in cats. I kissed her cheek, talked lilies, swallowed something coppery. Mr. Whiskers squinted judgment. Luna needed the throw blanket. I hung shelves level, one deliberate breath at a time. Responsibility, I learned, doesn't need a stroller to count. The winter remodel became everyone's favorite traveling punchline. I studied grout lines like a language I could speak, chose appliances the way surgeons choose instruments. Quiet, careful. Karen toured the cabinets, called it practice, smirk almost permanent. Maybe someday you'll host for a real family, Em. The words lodged behind my ribs, cold as January air. I ironed napkins anyway, laid forks like quiet soldiers. Mia squeezed my hand, whispering, "Breathe," over the kettle. I shelved comebacks and kept cooking for 12 anyway. It wasn't practice. It was dignity under good lighting. 2 years ago, the axis of my days tilted. I met James at a conference coffee station, exhausted. He spilled cream, apologized, and handed me too many napkins. We traded schedules, then stories, then the truth beneath both. He was a single dad. Sophie was almost 3. Her mother had relinquished rights and vanished into silence. His voice softened on Sophie's name, prayer without cathedral. Photos. Spaghetti-smeared grin. Wild curls feral with sunlight. "She's everything," he said, gravity landing without drama. Something inside me answered. Not surrender exactly. Readiness. Dating James meant learning clocks that kept different time. Noon coffees between preschool pickup and stand-ups became ritual. Dinners happened after stories, baths, and dishwasher sighs. He guarded Sophie's world like a winter lamp's thin glass. I respected tides. I respected bedtime. I respected boundaries. When he said, "I think you should meet," he planned. Bridges, not leaps. Patient, exact, and kind by design. We chose the Children's Museum. Curiosity melts ice faster. Sophie hid behind his jeans, eyes solemn and bright. I crouched low, waved, and let silence feel safe. "Show me your favorite thing?" I asked, voice steady. She led us to a wind tunnel, throwing scarves skyward. We chased floating color until the blue touched ceiling. At lunch, she declared, "I listen good, don't fix hair." James laughed, relief untying its tight occupational knot. We left holding hands without ceremony, sticky palm warm. Sleepover night, monsters visited, she called the new name. James was showering. I reached her first, matching breath. "Thanks, Mama Emma," she whispered into my sweater. Quiet lightning went through my chest and rebuilt a room. James appeared, hair wet, hope careful and brightening. "How do you feel?" he asked like a prayer. "Terrified," I said, "and completely in love, truthfully." We turned on every light and talked about forever. He explained papers. Her mother's rights were already relinquished. If Sophie wanted, and we married, adoption could follow. He didn't push. He laid the map on table. Our home learned our names one Tuesday at dusk. Pancakes Saturdays, library Tuesdays, crayons and rain in hallways. Cat diplomacy proceeded like treaties. And somehow the treaties held. Mr. Whiskers judged less. Luna chose Sophie's pillow forever. Drawings bloomed on the fridge. 3 people, 2 cats. Labels backward and proud. Daddy, Mama, me, Whisks, Luna. 8 months ago, we packed my apartment in laughter. Sophie wrapped measuring spoons like jewels. Wrote fragile carefully. It felt exactly, strangely, perfectly correct and true. Moving in wasn't fireworks. It was toothbrushes sharing a cup. My Dutch oven clinked beside his veteran cast iron. A hallway nightlight clicked on for small midnight feet. Calendars merged, their colors overlapping like spring Easter eggs. He fixed the squeaky hinge. I tamed our pantry. Sophie declared the guest room our playroom for everyone. We strung paper stars and counted them to sleep. Sometimes I folded tiny socks, listening to soft breathing. How quiet labor keeps the hinged roof of love steady. Outside, the jokes kept arriving with infuriating postal accuracy. "Real motherhood is sacrifice," Karen posted, tagging me boldly. At dinner, she praised chaos. My calm was counterfeit. I kept choosing calm anyway, because Sophie noticed everything. Responsibility looked like thermometers, timers, and gentle do-overs. Sounded like "use your words," said 20 patient ways. Tasted like chicken soup, smelled like crayons and rain. One night, James asked if a ring felt right. "Not yet," I said. "Let Sophie feel steady first." He tucked patience back into his pocket like lint. We planned to tell my family with context and care. A dinner where listening could outrun everyone's favorite assumptions. Meet Sophie before naming her. Meet James before measuring him. Meanwhile, Karen's rhythm of digs never missed its beat. I didn't clap back. I strengthened the load-bearing beams. Not revenge. Steadiness. Then Ava's party appeared like opportunity. Karen's house glittered pink, crowns on chairs, wands and cups. Ava bounced in socks, sugar bright on both cheeks. I set the dollhouse down, careful, choosing calm over commentary. Karen clocked it and smiled like she'd already won. "Practice furniture for a practice life," she murmured, sugary and sharp. "Open Aunt Emma's," Mom urged, trying very hard for neutral. Ava gasped when the porch light clicked, tiny and perfect. "The stairs work," she whispered, touching railings with frosting fingers. Family drifted closer. Karen swirled wine, queenly in the doorway. "Victorian," she trilled, "for pretend tea with pretend guests." Brett smirked, auditioning for trouble with very little effort. Choking hazards, he declared, pointing like a town crier. Karen sighed theatrically. Emma wouldn't know about kids anyway. A nervous chuckle rustled through paper plates and plastic forks. I tapped the safety label, kept my voice even. 5 and up, extra felt pads here, instructions inside. The playlist got louder, like volume could replace kindness. Karen posted herself beside the house like she owned it. Still playing house with your cats, she announced grandly. Now recruiting my daughter to join the fantasy. Laughter popped like balloons, fast, thin, then embarrassingly quiet. Mom sawed cake. Dad inspected his fork with devotion. My mouth tasted metallic, but my hands stayed steady. Let's focus on Ava, I said, gentle and clear. Her smile sharpened until it felt exactly like a paper cut. We're focusing on her future, she said, chin lifted. Not pretending at your life. Not today, not ever. Brett leaned in like a microphone on a talk show. Still single, right? Any prospects besides cat roommates? He pointed at fridge magnets captioned Domestic Goddess, Feline Edition. Brett, Mom warned, tired around the edges, voice low. He shrugged innocence on like his favorite cardigan. Karen refilled his cup, pleased with her co-conspirator. Children are hard, she said. Not returnable to Petco. Ava looked between us, forecasting weather without vocabulary. I knelt beside her. The carpet pressed my knees. This house is yours, I said, keeping my voice soft. I'll build it with you if your mom agrees. Ava nodded solemnly. Kids understand ceremony and jurisdiction. My phone hummed. A small lighthouse in my pocket. James. Sophie feels better. Want us to swing by? If she's good, come, it's time, I wrote back. A heart appeared. I breathed to 4, twice. Someone fought the Bluetooth. The playlist hiccuped mid-chorus. Karen leaned close. Perfume crowded the small living room. Don't sulk, she whispered. We tease because we love. You tease because you can, I said, still kind. And because no one stops you when it hurts. Her eyes flashed surprise, annoyance, then something uncertain. She switched to public voice, bright as polished cutlery. Ava, thank Aunt Emma for the practice furniture. Ava hugged my legs. Sincerity cleared the adult weather. She named the tiny dog Waffles, cradling plastic carefully. The front door opened. Time did a very strange thing. Afternoon light bent softly around 2 familiar silhouettes. James entered, carrying drowsy Sophie, ribbons slightly crooked. He kissed her forehead, scanned faces, anchored on me. Go to Mama, he said, voice a warm landing. Sophie blinked awake and lit like a small sunrise. Mommy! She squealed, arms reaching without hesitation. Silence congealed, heavy and exact across the room. I crossed to them, lifted Sophie, breathed her shampoo. Her fingers found my necklace by muscle memory. Princess party? She asked, eyeing the castle greedily. If Ava says yes, I answered, letting ownership stand. Ava unfroze first and waved Sophie over immediately. 2 girls, knees down, heads together, negotiations commenced. Mom, Dad, I said, this is James and Sophie. James offered his hand, posture open, tone anchored, sure. Mrs. Chen, Mr. Chen, thanks for having us today. Emma talks about your lasagna. We try to imitate. Mom shook automatically. Manners steered her through shock. Dad nodded, squeezed. Relief flickered behind his glasses. Karen's jaw clicked and locked into a precise line. Brett rolled in like a news van late to fire. Wait, you have a kid? Since when? He blurted. Did you, order one online? He added. The room sharpened around the edges of his joke. James angled himself between Brett and the girls, instinctive. Let's keep it respectful, he said, mild but final. Nearly 2 years, I told Brett, plain as water. Karen found a voice, but not a generous version. So this is why you've been busy and private. Dragging a child into fantasy on my daughter's birthday. Mark arrived, palms up, trying hard to de-escalate. Car, come on, he murmured. Let's reset and breathe. She shrugged him off like vinyl shrugs the rain. I won't be made fool in my own house. James stayed steady, a bridge doing its only job. We didn't plan surprise. Sophie woke asking for Mama. We introduce when it feels right. Her comfort first. Sophie and Ava debated Waffles' bedroom with serious faces. Mom's eyes brimmed like bowls carried with careful wrists. Why didn't you tell us? She asked, voice frayed. Dad cleared his throat, found a workable gear. We'd have wanted to meet them sooner, honey. Old fear left my lungs like something overdue. We needed surety, I said. Sophie needed slow. Privacy kept outside noise from crowding her small world. Karen laughed. A sound with corners, no cushioning. Privacy, she echoed, ringing it like a warning bell. Or secrecy for your dramatic entrance and applause. I didn't make you anything, I said, staying calm. Your jokes made me small in rooms I love. Mark's mouth opened, then closed. The playlist softened to strings. Dad rested a hand on James's shoulder, awkwardly kind. Mom noticed Sophie's ribbons and knelt, voice gentler. I love your dress. Sunflowers are my favorite, too. Sophie introduced Elephant like visiting royalty, pleased. Welcome, Mom told them, clearly meaning every syllable. Karen watched acceptance happen without her permission to control it. Pride pulled against grief across her carefully practiced expression. She set her glass down with a soft final clink. Would you have told me first? She asked quietly. Yes, I said, truth cut open cleanly, nothing hidden. At dinner soon, with time and context for questions. I wanted to protect Sophie from becoming a spectacle, and protect us from becoming your online content. Her mouth twitched. The hit landed where it belonged. They were jokes, she whispered, parachute line already fraying. They were public, I said. They taught people to belittle. They taught me to lock doors you used to open. Sophie tugged my sleeve. Waffles apparently needed water. James crouched and treated the problem with comic gravity. Ava appointed him royal carpenter of balconies and stairs. He accepted a tiny plastic hammer with solemn dignity. Laughter rippled warmer, less like glass breaking under feet. Mark's shoulders dropped. Brett fetched napkins without commentary. Karen's laugh arrived late, brittle first, then softened. Okay, she said finally, tasting a different road. Okay, but not on my daughter's birthday, she added. I can't absorb new family between cupcakes, she admitted. You don't have to, I said, gentler than before. Today is hello. Questions can live on another night. She nodded, a motion that obviously cost real energy. Her eyes found Sophie, then James, and finally me. The room expanded like lungs returning from long apnea. Conversation resumed, careful, then gradually less careful. Dad asked about parks near our street in Queens. Mom debated sprinkles versus chips with Sophie, delighted. Brett surrendered his spotlight and took the trash out. Ava installed waffles downstairs with ceremony and authority. Karen touched the roof, thinking, then made a ruling. Waffles sleeps downstairs, she said. Thunder scares small dogs. Ava nodded. Sophie saluted. The committee resumed building. I felt my ribs loosen. Space returned in my chest. Karen met my eyes and didn't immediately look away. I was cruel, she said. I don't know why. Later, I said, when it isn't Ava's day. We'll have the long talk and I will listen. Today, let's just start with not being cruel. Gratitude flickered, brief, unguarded, across her tired face. She set a paper crown on Sophie's bowed head. Princess guest, she said. Sophie checked it, then grinned. The kitchen filled. Mom lit candles with steadier hands. Make a wish, we chorused, practicing tenderness in unison. Ava blew. Cheers rose, uncomplicated and honest. James slipped his arm around my waist, a steady anchor. Okay, he murmured. Okay, I answered, meaning it. We cut cake, we passed plates, we exhaled. Karen stacked crowns into a tidy, colorful monument. Back in the living room, the castle begged wiring. Engineer, Ava decreed, handing James the instruction sheet. He knelt, inspected, and gave Sophie the tiny screwdriver. Teamwork, he announced. They formed a very serious committee. Aunt Lena hovered, palms dusted with sugar, curious. Different happy, she said. You look different, Emma. We're building slow, I answered. Slow holds through weather. She nodded and kindly chose not to pry. Mom hovered, offering ribbon rewinds and candle technique. Dad swapped bus route tips like friendly currency. I watched threads cross and braid without forcing anything. The braid wasn't neat yet, but it was strong. Karen returned carrying grapes and pretzels like a treaty. She placed them down between kingdoms. Practical peace offering. I stood inside it all, feeling tectonic plates shift. Old geography redrew borders without fireworks or sirens. We weren't finished, but conversation had finally begun. Ava saved our gift for last by solemn decree. She patted the porch, named it Princess Annex proudly. Karen announced a ribbon cutting. Mark found actual ribbon. Brett wielded plastic spoons like ceremonial scissors, chastened. We counted down, voices braided, imperfect but earnest. Ava cut. Bubbles sputtered. Elephant approved with dignity. Mom dabbed her eyes, blaming imaginary bubble residue. Dad took a photo he promised not to overshare. Karen glanced at James's inner pocket, then away. Whenever that happens, she said, plan it with me. Not like today, she added, glancing at Sophie, careful. Yes, I said, because bridges deserve blueprints and care. The afternoon thinned into honeyed light along the street. Goodbyes clustered. Promises were spoken, some to be kept. Mom hugged James. Dad told Sophie about hardware candy jars. Brett carried trash again, a quieter night of garbage. Karen hugged me awkwardly, then less awkwardly, then real. Tea later, she said. I'll listen, I promised. We loaded the car, the sky settled like silk. Sophie buckled elephant safety officer with grave concentration. James closed the trunk and paused beside my door. He reached into his jacket. Velvet brushed his fingers. I stopped him gently. Not a stage. Choose quiet. He smiled, understanding shape deep in muscle and bone. From the porch, Karen watched, arms crossed, posture softer. Ava waved Waffles goodnight from the annex steps. Mom and Dad stood together inside the doorway light. We pulled away. My heart found a calmer rhythm. Conflict hadn't vanished. Its edges had finally softened. The night held room for whatever needed beginning next. 1 week later, Sunday dinner filled my parents' house. Roast chicken, jasmine rice, bowls of greens and oranges. Aunt Lena arrived with pies. Brett arrived with opinions. Karen came last, shoulders squared like a marching band. James squeezed my hand. Sophie carried elephant and crayons. Mom lit the good candles, the ones for holidays. Dad turned off the game and told everyone sit. The table glowed like a small stage without curtains. I stood first, heart steady from too much practice. Thank you for coming, I said, voice clear, even. I have updates and I have boundaries, both necessary. Karen exhaled loudly. Brett grinned like a studio audience. James nodded once, then set a folder beside plates. Sophie whispered, "Is it the special dinner, Mama?" "It is," I said, and she beamed at me. "I've been called a pretend adult for years now," I began, choosing every word like a rung. I didn't defend myself because privacy kept Sophie safe. Tonight, privacy becomes family, and family requires respect. I opened the folder. Paper whispered like careful thunder. First, screenshots of Karen's posts I had quietly saved. Captions circled, real family. Cat lady epidemic, laughing emojis. Jokes, Karen said, small, already knowing what came next. They taught strangers to belittle me, I answered, still calm. They taught me to lock doors you used to open. I slid the pages back, then brought out the letters. A notarized statement, our lawyer's note, the adoption roadmap. Her mother relinquished rights, James said, voice steady, respectful. When we marry, Emma will adopt Sophie if Sophie wants. Sophie nodded hard enough to rattle her bows. I want, she said, serious, small, certain, unafraid. Karen stared at the letterhead like it might blink. Mom pressed her fingers together, tears shining without falling. Dad cleared his throat, found words lined up properly. We're honored to witness this, he said, voice rough. And to help however you need us to. Brett looked at the papers, then at my face. Okay, he muttered, deflating. That's not content. That's real. I placed one last envelope at Karen's place. Inside, a single photo of the dollhouse porch. A ribbon, 2 crowns, 2 girls bent in concentration. On the back, practice is how any of us become real. Karen turned it over, thumb trembling like an apology. I was cruel, she whispered, louder than shouting somehow. I thought I was protecting you from a smaller life. I was protecting my story about what counted. She drew a breath that wobbled but didn't break. I deleted the posts, she added, almost to herself. I started therapy Tuesday. I'm trying to change. The room held it, a cup catching a spill. James looked at me. The air gathered itself. He stood, then dropped to one knee beside Sophie. He opened the velvet box the world kept guessing. Light found the ring and stayed there, unembarrassed. Emma, he said, you made our home feel inevitable. You choose Sophie every day, and you choose me. We choose you back. Will you marry us? Sophie pressed Elephant to my arm like a seal. Say yes, Mama, she breathed, eyes huge, hopeful. The table blurred. My yes arrived before my breath. Yes, I said, then laughed, then said it again. James slid the ring on. My hands finally shook. Applause broke like summer rain against a hot sidewalk. Mom cried outright. Dad made the world's softest whoop. Aunt Lena clapped like castanets. Brett actually fist-pumped. Even Karen smiled, helpless and human in the light. Then I raised a hand because happiness also needs rules. I'm grateful, I said. But we're not finished yet. Love without boundaries turns into spectacle very quickly. Boundary 1. No more public jokes about my worth. Boundary 2. If Sophie is present, respect leads every sentence. Boundary 3. If you slip, you apologize like grown-ups. Boundary 4. Participation is voluntary. Access is earned. Silence held. Then Mom nodded first, the way mothers do. Agreed, she said, voice steady like a held hymn. Dad tapped the table twice, our family's old yes. Lena lifted a fork and said, to new rules. Brett swallowed pride and added, and to not being dumb. Mark took Karen's hand. She didn't pull away. Karen turned to me, face stripped of theater. I agree, she said, plain as rain. All 4. And if I forget, remind me once then twice. After that I will leave and try again later. It was the bravest thing I'd ever heard her say. Sophie tugged my sleeve, business not quite concluded. Can I tell them my rule? She asked carefully. Always, I said, kneeling so we were eye level. No yelling, she said, when I am in the room. And no making Mama small, not even a little. We all looked at James. He saluted very seriously. Adopted, he said. As policy. Effective immediately. Unanimous. Karen stood, rounded the table, stopped beside my chair. She took a breath and hugged me like a bridge. Congratulations, she said on purpose, close enough to hear fear. I'm happy for you, and I am sorry. Thank you, I said, feeling a hinge unclench quietly. Then I turned, because the story needed a finish. I lifted my glass. The room lifted theirs with me. I was never playing house, I said, clear, steady. I was building one. Keys, rules, love, and a payroll. You're welcome inside if you wipe your feet. And if you can't, you don't come in. The sentence landed like truth finally sitting down. The candles flickered, then agreed by burning steadier. Somewhere a timer dinged. Life remembered to continue. Mom served pie, Dad poured tea like a ceremony. James kissed my temple. Sophie fed elephant pretend crumbs. Karen passed plates, and this time didn't narrate mine. Outside, early evening hung laundry on the neighborhood trees. Inside, our yes kept echoing, but more quietly now. The kind of echo you can live with every day. 6 months later, mornings found a steadier rhythm at home. Coffee and toast. Crayons on placemats. Sneakers drying by vents. Sophie lined stuffed animals by height and called roll. James packed lunches with notes and crooked little hearts. I checked calendars. Colors overlapped like quiet Easter eggs. Ordinary days arrived, and we kept choosing them. We married in my parents' backyard on a Saturday. String lights hummed. Peonies bowed. The grill clicked patiently. Sophie wore ribbons, both flower girl and ring bearer, carrying rings in a small wicker basket like treasure. When music started, she walked like someone on mission. Elephant rode shotgun, wordless and fully on task. Dad cried once, then blamed a wandering breeze. Mom fixed my veil with hands gentler than before. Karen arranged chairs, counted forks, and checked herself too. During toasts, she stood, paper trembling, voice unexpectedly brave. I mistook noise for love, control for care, jokes for closeness. I'm sorry, she said. I'm learning different. Our lawyer filed adoption papers the following Tuesday. The clerk stamped dates. Pages felt heavier, kinder. Sophie practiced her new signature on scrap envelopes. Middle name Emma, she decided, planets aligned in ink. She wrote it backward once, then laughed without shame. Best present, she said, battery-free and forever. At school, she started a mixed-up families lunch club. Kids compared charts, step bonus, foster, chosen, found. They drew houses with extra doors and shared keys. Her teacher wrote, "She's matter-of-fact and kind." Boundaries held at Sunday dinners like sturdy handrails. We hung no snark above the coat rack. Advice needed invitation. Questions started with, "May I ask?" Mom adopted the rules first and felt real relief. Beginning therapy Tuesdays, the slot after Karen's. Dad practiced 3 phrases until they sounded natural. I don't know. I was wrong. I'm proud. When Sophie lost a tooth, he built a fairy door. Authorized personnel, night shift only, in tiny print. Brett apologized without microphones or punchlines. He carried chairs and cropped himself from photos. Online, Karen scrubbed captions and archived the performance era, posting quieter pictures and asking permission first. Ava and Sophie ran the dollhouse like a city. Snack permits, balcony rules, waffles downstairs during thunder. We wired tiny lights, then dimmed the real ones. Glow nested inside glow, a smaller home inside home. There were stumbles, not punishments, when lines frayed. A joke slipped at a barbecue one night. Karen caught it, rewound, and tried the sentence again. Sophie tapped her wrist, our signal for repair. Karen kneeled, apologized, and asked what would feel right. Sprinkles, Sophie said, and that was enough. Some evenings I remembered the day the room shifted. How truth waited until I had hands to hold it. Not spectacle, not leverage. Commitment carried in daylight. Privacy was a seed. Later it grew into shade. Fewer voices meant space. I could finally hear myself. James and I kept building a life to scale. Strong hinges, slow cabinets, labels we could live with. He brought patience. I brought lists. Sophie brought confetti. We penciled baby someday, never as a remedy. Home already breathed plural, complete enough to exhale. The adoption hearing arrived on a clear, cold morning. Courtrooms smell like paper, polish, caffeine, and nerves. The judge asked Sophie the simple, important question gently. "Do you want Emma to be your mother?" She stood on tiptoes and said, "She already is." My knees wobbled. James steadied the entire sky. We celebrated with pancakes and syrup maps of countries. Elephant got a passport and a sleepover visa. We framed the decree, smaller than the feelings it proved. Family chat renamed itself keys, shoes, snacks, feelings. Pinned rules. Ask permission. Apologize promptly. Screenshot nothing. Assume care. Grandma added hearts and far too many teacups. She called Sophie great-grand. Forgot the hyphen again. We let it stay. Love rarely needs punctuation. Quiet surprises kept arriving, the kind only homes notice. Mom invited Mia to Sunday supper without prompting. Dad asked James about a stubborn drawer that stuck. Mark taught Sophie chain grease and tire pressure checks. Ava declared cousin sleepovers a constitutional childhood right. Karen listens now in ways I used to dream. She still marches and counts, but texts before spiraling. We brew tea and practice sentences like careful drivers. We loop back, signal, yield, then merge again. I'm not the woman they joked about at birthdays. I'm the one who built a kitchen and boundaries. Who knows unbounded love turns into weather, not shelter. Who learned privacy grows truth, not secrets, when tended. And that forgiveness is maintenance, done regularly, on purpose. Happiness fit before and after. Both chapters belong. Sometimes I stand in Sophie's doorway at night. The nightlight hums. Paper stars keep patient company. She sleeps with one hand open, palm relaxed upward. I think about thresholds and who earns knocking rights. How daylight stayed once we finally let it in. How quiet joy hums and somehow still thunders. On the fridge, her drawing names us simply and exactly. Daddy, Mama, me, Whisks, Luna, Elephant, House, Heart, Stars. She added Karen, Mark, Ava, Grandma, Grandpa, Aunt Lena. Above the door, she taped our rule like a banner. No making people small, it says. Not even a little. When I pass the dollhouse, I touch its tiny porch. And remember Karen's living room and that electric word. The hush, the turning, the faces finally leaning in. Choosing calm and being chosen back, steady as tide. I flip the miniature lights on, then turn to dinner. Home glows, the table waits, we know where to sit. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you've ever been minimized by family or told, your life wasn't real, what helped you reclaim your voice? And what would you tell your younger self today? Share your story in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. If this resonated, please like the video, subscribe for more real family stories, and consider sharing it with someone who needs a gentle reminder. You are enough.
The afternoon at the hospital had been like any other monitoring vitals, checking charts, adjusting medication dosages. I was in the pediatric wing, standing outside Tyler's room while he tried to show me how fast he could build a Lego tower, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Normally, I let calls go unanswered during shifts, but the number flashing on the screen was local, and something in me decided to pick up. "This is Sable Whitaker," I said softly, stepping into the hallway. A crisp male voice introduced himself as Craig Donovan from Cascadia Bank. His tone was calm, almost indifferent, as if he were discussing a minor billing error. "I'm calling regarding your delinquent mortgage payments. You're 90 days behind on the loan for Highland Drive. The balance owed is $600,000. For a second, my mind went blank. "I don't have a mortgage," I replied, pressing my back against the wall. He insisted their records showed otherwise and asked me to confirm the last 4 digits of my Social Security number. I hesitated, then gave them. He read them back, perfectly correct. Then came the rest, a listed income nearly double my actual salary, and a credit score in the high 700s. It wasn't mine, it couldn't be. I clutched the phone tighter, my breath shallow. Highland Drive. The name struck a familiar note. It was in Queen Anne, just below Cary Park, the hill where tourists lined up for sunset photos. My father had been boasting about a forever view not long ago, joking that I should be ready for barbecues once he finished settling in. I ended the call mechanically, but my hands trembled as I returned to Tyler's room, unable to shake the thought that somehow, impossibly, my name was already written on that house. My apartment in Ballard wasn't much by most standards. 1 bedroom above a coffee shop, a mailbox secured with a padlock I bought after a neighbor's mail was stolen, and shelves that sagged under the weight of too many plants. Still, it was mine. I paid rent on time, brewed cheap coffee in the mornings, and on days off took the ferry to Bainbridge to walk the wooded trails alone. My life was modest, predictable, even quiet, but it was honest. My father's life had once been anything but quiet. For decades, Dorian Whitaker's name had been on the signs outside half-framed houses scattered across King County. He specialized in craftsman restorations homes with broad porches and sturdy beams that seemed to promise permanence. When I was little, he'd take me to job sites, letting me hammer scrapwood while he shouted instructions to his crew. Back then, he was admired, the kind of man people trusted with their biggest investment. But markets shift. A slowdown after the crash and a disastrous partnership hollowed out his business. I watched pride turn brittle as contracts dwindled and debts stacked higher. He bristled at the idea that he was finished, refusing to be spoken of in the past tense. At family dinners in my parents' Finney Ridge home, he masked frustration with humor. He'd carve the roast and laugh about using every tool in the box to stay ahead. More than once, he called me his responsible one, praising my steady job while half joking that I ought to let him peek at my pay stubs for a trade line check. I'd laughed nervously, not realizing at the time that jokes can be blueprints. The memory unsettled me now. He was the man who taught me how to sign my name with care, pressing the pen firmly so it couldn't be lifted or altered. And yet, the bank's voice still echoed in my ear, telling me my signature had appeared where I'd never placed it. I could no longer ignore the faint crack running through the table we all gathered around, a crack that seemed to widen each time I thought of Highland Drive. 2 mornings later, I walked into Cascadia Bank's downtown branch, my palms damp against the folder I carried, though it was nearly empty. A manager named Richard Peterson led me to a glass-walled office. He slid a heavy file across the desk, each page protected in plastic sleeves as though preserving evidence from a crime scene. "Here is the application," he said, his finger tapping the header. My name sat bold across the top, followed by a salary nearly double what I actually earned. There was my social security number, my birth date, even my employer's information all correct, but weaponized. Next came income verifications. Pay stubs I never provided, and closing disclosures stamped with a notary seal. The notary's name was real. I recognized it from other county documents. The deed of trust listed a recorded instrument number that Peterson said I could trace at the King County Recorder's office. The paper felt heavy, official, unassailable, except it wasn't my hand. The signature curved across line after line, convincingly mine at first glance. I stared long enough to feel sick, every muscle tightening as if bracing against an earthquake. My father had taught me to press hard when signing, so no one could lift my name. Whoever forged this knew that too. "Can I get certified copies of all of this?" I asked. My voice sounded thin but steady. "Of course," Peterson said, sliding a request form toward me. He lowered his voice. "If you're telling me you didn't sign these, you should contact the Federal Trade Commission and law enforcement. This isn't just a clerical mistake. By the time I stepped out into the drizzle of 2nd Avenue, I had already placed a fraud alert with Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, filed an affidavit through the FTC's identity theft portal, and scheduled an appointment with the Seattle Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. The ink on those pages was crisp, the seals authentic, but every stroke told a lie. And as I folded the copies into my bag, I knew the next step was no longer optional. I had to bring this into the light. Detective Rowan Hale met me in a cramped office at the Financial Crimes Unit, a stack of files already waiting on the desk. He was direct, speaking in a steady cadence that left little room for wishful thinking. The mortgage application was submitted from a fixed IP address in Georgetown, he said, turning the monitor toward me. "That location matches your father's workshop." I stared at the screen, the highlighted numbers blurring. Georgetown, where the sawdust smell clung to every rafter, where I'd once swept floors as a child to earn ice cream money. I didn't need confirmation, but here it was. Rowan flipped to the next file. "The title searches show the property closed unusually fast, under 3 weeks. There's also a scheduled cash-out refinance, same property, same borrower's name, yours. If it had gone through, another $200,000 would have been drawn." He paused, tapping the margin. And there are liens filed by contractors. Unpaid bills stacking up. The picture sharpened into something uglier. This wasn't a panicked mistake. It was layered, planned pride demanding a Queen Anne view. Desperation borrowing my future to hold it up. And beneath it all, Lena's glossy staging business. A showroom masquerading as a home. That night, my mother called, her voice low as if the walls might listen. "Sable, don't go to the police yet. Your father, he's proud, but he's not a criminal. Let us talk first. If this goes public, it'll ruin him." I almost laughed at the word ruin, as though my shredded credit and forged name weren't already debris. But I kept my tone even. Mom, the bank, the recorder's office, the police they already know. It's bigger than us now. Silence stretched, broken only by her quiet plea. Just remember, families fix their own walls before letting strangers in. I hung up, but her words lingered. My father had always insisted that signatures were as solid as beams, that a house built straight would never sag. Yet here I was, standing under the weight of a roof I hadn't raised, wondering how long I could carry it before the structure collapsed entirely. The next step was no longer about discovery, it was about confrontation. The days that followed blurred into paperwork and long hours bent over my dining table. I drafted letters to each bureau confirming the fraud alerts, submitted dispute forms to Cascadia Bank's risk team, and swore out an affidavit of non-participation. Each envelope felt heavier than its contents, as if sealing them shut was nailing boards across a door I could never open again. I went to a notary in Fremont to sign the sworn statement. The woman glanced over the document, asked for my license, and then watched as I signed my name. I pressed the pen hard into the paper, the way my father once taught me. I heard his voice in memory. If you press deep enough, no one can lift it. A true line can't be faked. The irony made my chest tighten. He had shown me how to make a signature strong, then used that knowledge to forge mine. Turning him in wasn't like turning in a stranger. It carried the weight of our entire history. Still, history didn't erase debt, and debt in my name would bury me alive. At the suggestion of Detective Hale, I contacted Tess Morey, a title officer with a reputation for precision. She met me at her office near the county courthouse, pulling up the recorded deed and deed of trust. The pages looked no different from the copies I already had, except Tess highlighted the margin notes like a professor dissecting a text. "There," she said, pointing. "Every instrument has a preparer's phone number. Most people don't notice. This one, it's your father's cell. He's listed himself as the contact for title corrections." My stomach dropped. It was the kind of mistake you only made if you believed you'd never be caught. "Keep this page flagged," Tess advised, handing me a red marker. "Courts like undeniable links. This is one." I walked back to my car, the annotated deed in my hands like a splintered beam. Every line I drew between fraud and family was becoming clearer, sharper, unavoidable. The law measured angles that didn't bend for blood. That night, I filed the new evidence with Hale, attaching scans of Tess's notes. I stared at the confirmation email long after I hit send, the glow of the screen casting hard shadows across the apartment walls. The case was moving forward, and so was I. The only path left was the one that led to my father's table. Detective Hale called me back to the precinct 3 days later. His desk held a different kind of evidence, this time a folder of printed emails, drafts, and spreadsheets pulled from a seized laptop. He slid one page across to me without a word. It was a bankruptcy petition already filled in with my name, social security number, and employment information. Attached were pre-written hardship letters, pleading my case as though I had authored them myself. "This wasn't panic," Hale said, leaning back. "This was planned. Your father was preparing to walk you straight into bankruptcy court. He'd strip what he could from the refinance, then leave you holding the wreckage." The room seemed to tilt. I had convinced myself, in weaker moments, that desperation had pushed him into a corner. But this was design. architecture built with my identity as the frame. By the time I left the precinct, my mind was already on the next step. Talking privately would only bury the truth again, smoothed over with charm and excuses. No, if this was going to be confronted, it needed witnesses and daylight. Our next Sunday dinner in Finney Ridge would be the place. I printed the police report, flagged the recorder numbers, and bound the pages together into a packet. Sliding the stack into my bag felt like placing a stone there, heavy but necessary. That evening, my phone buzzed with a call from my mother. Iris's voice trembled. "Please, Sable, let us handle this at home. If you go through with this, it'll destroy him." "It already has," I said softly. Minutes later, another message arrived from Lena, a text about family optics, about not airing what could be handled within the walls of kin. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. To them, my credit, my name, my future were planks in a deck they could stand on, joists hidden beneath their feet. I would not be hidden anymore. When Sunday came, I walked up the steps of the house I had grown up in, the packet pressed flat in my bag, ready to lay bare what could no longer stay buried. The smell of salmon and roasted potatoes drifted through the house. So ordinary it almost disguised the weight of what I carried. We gathered around the maple table that had hosted every birthday and holiday of my childhood. Conversation hummed low, Lena bragging about a new staging project, my mother fussing over portion sizes, my father pouring himself a glass of red wine. I didn't speak until plates were half empty. Then I reached into my bag, drew out the bound packet, and slid it across the table. The sound of paper against wood was louder than the clink of silverware. My father's fork slipped from his hand, striking porcelain. Everyone froze. "What's this?" he asked, though his eyes betrayed recognition. "Police report," I said evenly. "Identity theft, mortgage fraud, bankruptcy papers you wrote in my name." Color rose in his face. "I meant to refinance it properly." "You're resilient, Sable. You owe the family a win after everything I built." I felt my hands steady. "What you built was a crime scene. You forged my signature, drained my credit, and tried to bankrupt me to save yourself." My mother pressed her napkin to her lips, whispering, "Dorian, please tell me this isn't true." Lena cut in sharply. "This doesn't belong at a dinner table. Families handle things privately. Families don't steal from each other," I said, my voice hard enough to still the room. At that moment, my phone lit up on the table. Detective Hale's name across the screen. I answered on speaker. His voice carried through the silence. "We're moving forward with charges." The words settled like dust after demolition. My mother's eyes filled, torn between disbelief and grief. My father gripped the arms of his chair, jaw tight, as if holding back collapse. I ended the call and closed the folder, the lines between us carved as sharp as the knife still resting by my plate. The air in the dining room felt different now, as though the walls themselves had shifted, and I knew nothing in this house would return to what it had been. After that dinner, my father shoved his chair back and stormed out, muttering about ungrateful children as he slammed the door behind him. By the next morning, he was holed up in the Queen Anne house, as though squatting in the shell he had built with my stolen name. My mother, pale and trembling, packed a bag and drove across the bridge to her sister's place in West Seattle. The split in the family was no longer hidden. It gaped like a crack running the length of a foundation. News traveled quickly. Neighbors who had once admired my father's work now whispered when they saw me at the market. Word of lines surfaced contractors he had stiffed were filing claims in district court. Each petition another nail in the coffin of his reputation. Cascadia Bank moved swiftly, accelerating the note and scheduling foreclosure proceedings. The Queen Anne view that had cost me my credit was slipping from his hands even before the courts finished with him. A week later, I stood outside the Georgetown workshop as Seattle police officers carried out boxes of files and hard drives. The sight of the building stripped bare hit me harder than I expected. That shop had been my childhood playground, a place where I first swung a hammer under his watchful eye. Now it was reduced to evidence tags and seized property. Extended relatives began calling, their voices edged with accusation. "You could withdraw. Sable. He's your father. Don't ruin him." I listened, then repeated the words Hale had told me if I withdrew. The bank and the courts would assume my consent. Complicity would follow me, and as a licensed nurse, I could not afford the stain. Protecting him would mean destroying myself. Each choice I made felt like tearing another beam from the frame of the family story I'd grown up inside. Yet as the walls gave way, I knew it was the only path left if I wanted a life built on something true. And so I waited for the courts to open their doors, carrying the weight of what remained. The courtroom smelled faintly of dust and old wood polish, a place where lives were weighed and measured without ceremony. My father stood at the defendant's table, thinner than I remembered, his hands clasped in front of him as if restraint could undo what he had done. When the charges were read, identity theft. Filing false financial statements, he nodded, the plea already agreed upon. He spoke only once, his voice low but clear. He admitted he had used my social security number, copied pay stubs I'd once handed him in trust, and filed documents without hesitation. "I assumed her consent," he said, glancing toward me. "Because family." The judge leaned forward, her gavel resting on the bench. "What you assumed was ownership, not consent. What you called family was entitlement, not love." Her words landed heavier than the sentence 18 months in state custody, restitution payments, and supervised release to follow. When the hearing ended, I walked out into the chill of spring rain. The legal consequences were his to carry now, but the practical pieces of my life still needed repair. Cascadia finally rescinded the debt from my file. The credit bureaus began scrubbing away derogatories, and King County recorded a reconveyance after foreclosure closed the door on Highland Drive. I returned to my work at the hospital, keeping my head down, pouring myself into the routine of caring for children whose battles dwarfed my own. Therapy sessions through the Employee Assistance Program helped me untangle the guilt and grief that lingered, though the edges still cut. Justice had written its line across the record, but the question that remained was one the courts could never settle: the distance between the name I carried and the one he had stolen. The answer, I knew, would come only in what I chose to build next. By summer, I signed closing papers at a small Ballard bungalow. The mortgage was modest, the interest rate fair, and for the first time in months, every document bore my signature alone. When the notary slid the deed across the desk, I pressed my pen firmly, the way I had been taught, but this time the line was mine by choice. The first thing I planted in the yard was a young dogwood. Its roots spread easily in the damp soil, and I liked knowing it would bloom each spring, white blossoms against the gray sky of Puget Sound. Each petal felt like proof that something fragile could also be resilient. My mother started counseling soon after, trying to separate her own grief from loyalty. Our conversations grew cautious but steadier, though contact with my father was limited to structured calls through his release plan. The distance felt necessary, like bracing a weakened beam so the rest of the frame wouldn't collapse. I began volunteering with a nonprofit that supported victims of identity theft. I sat across from people as shaken as I had been, walking them through freezes, affidavits, and recorder pulls. Each time I showed someone how to mark a fraudulent deed or lock down their credit, it felt like reclaiming ground I had lost. One evening, I carried the deed to my own home into the back room and slid it into a fireproof safe. My key ring now held just 3 keys: front door, mailbox, and storage shed. Light, honest, nothing hidden beneath someone else's name. I locked the safe, turned back to the garden, and watched the dogwood bend slightly in the breeze. It was a quiet beginning, but it was mine. Rooted in soil no one could take,